Nathaniel Garro, also known as the Hand of the Sigillite, was a loyalist captain of the Death Guard Traitor Legion during the course of the Great Crusade, as well as the first of Malcador the Sigillite's Knights Errant following the onset of the Horus Heresy. Garro was noted for being both a noble and highly skilled warrior, who would earn many accolades and battle honours during his many centuries of service, which dated all the way back to the dying days of the Terran Unification Wars. It was upon Terra that Garro would distinguish himself before none other than the Emperor himself, who would bestow the warrior with the honorific rank of Battle Captain, a title that Garro would continue to hold long after his legion had been reunited with their Primarch, Mortarion. Despite achieving much recognition throughout his career, Garro would remain a rather humble and modest warrior. Indeed, Garro would himself state that he did not seek glory upon the battlefield nor praise for his actions, but merely wished to perform his duty to the Emperor. It was this unwavering loyalty to the Master of Mankind that led to Garro fleeing from his legion so that he could warn the Emperor that Horus, the War Master of the Imperium and Primarch of the Sons of Horus Legion, had turned traitor. During the course of the Istvan III campaign, which culminated in the traitor legions purging most of the loyalist elements from their ranks, Garro would remain upon the frigate the Eisenstein, due in part to having suffered a severe leg injury prior to the events of the campaign, which left him temporarily unfit for frontline service as he adjusted to his new cybernetic prosthesis. As the traitor Primarchs gave the order to eliminate those loyalists that remained upon the surface, the Death Guard captain Ignatius Grulgor, who had also remained upon the Eisenstein in order to monitor Garro's actions, would attempt to unleash the ship's payload of virus bombs. After receiving word of Horus's betrayal from Sol Tarvitz, a loyalist from the Emperor's Children Legion, Garro, who had grown increasingly suspicious of Grulgor's actions, would confront his fellow captain, leading to a short but brutal firefight erupting between loyalist and traitor forces, which saw one of the virus bombs being punctured by a stray bolter round, allowing the Life Eater virus to spread throughout the launch bay. Thanks to the heroic sacrifice of Garro's housecarl, Caleb Aaron, the traitors aboard the Eisenstein would be slain, allowing the ship to be commandeered by the loyalists. After taking on board the loyalist son of Horus, now Lunar Wolf, Iacdon Cruz, as well as a number of Imperial remembrancers who witnessed Horus's betrayal firsthand, Garro and his men would flee from the Istvan system and set course for Terra. However, during the course of their journey, the ship's engines would reach critical mass, forcing Garro's crew to jettison them before making an emergency translation back into real space. Despite the Eisenstein being effectively stranded in the depths of space light years from civilization, the warp echo generated by the ship's detonating engines would be detected by Rogel Dawn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists Legion, to whom Garro would deliver his warning of Horus's betrayal. After being brought back to Luna, Terra's moon, and defeating the corrupted form of Solon Decius, the youngest member of his command squad, who had been transformed into an entity known as the Lord of Flies, Garro would be approached by Malcador the Sigillite, the Regent of Terra, who would recruit the former Death Guard into his service as one of his Knights Errant. Garro's armor would be stripped of all of his former legion's heraldry and iconography, leaving it a plain, silvery grey in coloration, which would then be adorned with the personal sigil of Malcador himself. While most of the other Knights Errant would eventually go on to establish the future Grey Knights chapter, and make their journey to the moon of Titan prior to the siege of Terra, Garro would instead remain upon the Throne World, where he would aid in its defense, battling against Traitor Legion forces. In battle, Garro wielded a mighty power sword known as Libertas, a weapon that was said to have been forged long before the events of the Great Crusade. In fact, the core components of this blade are so ancient that they even predate the events of the Age of Strife, and are rumoured to be even older still by tens of thousands of years. Indeed, it is clear that Libertas is in itself no mere run-of-the-mill sword, and has even been rumoured by some to demonstrate properties which are considered anomalous. With this in mind, is it possible that the core of Libertas is formed from none other than Excalibur, the legendary sword of King Arthur? While it may initially seem highly unlikely that such an ancient artifact could have survived up until the dawn of the 31st millennium, there is in fact a precedent for such relics, even those that are debatably even older than Excalibur, continuing to endure until this particular point in time. The most notable example in this regard, as detailed within the audio drama The Sigillite, is that of the Rosetta Stone, which thanks to the efforts of Captain Khalid Hassan of the Imperial Army would be recovered and safely contained within Malcador's own personal museum. Given that the Rosetta Stone was believed to have been created as far back as 196 BC, and was able to at least partially survive until the 31st millennium, then it isn't entirely unfeasible to believe that the key components of a sword that had been potentially forged during the late Iron Age could have also withstood the passage of time. The very name of Libertas itself could also be a mistranslation of an inscription that may or may not have originally existed upon the blade, which would have become faded and worn over the millennia to the point of being near illegible and easy to misidentify. In this case, the inscription upon the blade may have originally read Caliburnus, which was the Latinized name of Excalibur. If one removes the first two letters from Caliburnus in order to have the name read simply as Liburnus, then it becomes clear as to how one could have easily, but incorrectly, discerned the word Libertas from Liburnus, especially if a number of these original letters had been eroded to the point of being near indecipherable. Another piece of, albeit minor, potential evidence comes from the fact that Nathaniel Garro, like many of the original Terran recruits for the 14th Legion, came from the lands of Albia, which in ancient times was known as Britain or Albion. Because Excalibur in mythology was linked to the very sovereignty of Britain, then if such a weapon did indeed exist, it's likely that it may have remained within the future lands of Albia up until the events of the Terran Unification Wars, although there is admittedly little else to support this notion. An additional piece of evidence to support the idea of Libertas being Excalibur comes from the novel Saturnine. During the Siege of Terra, a number of breacher teams from the Sons of Horus Traitor Legion would launch a subterranean assault against a supposed structural weakness beneath the Saturnine Gate of the Imperial Palace, in hopes of ending the conflict with a precise surgical strike. However, Rogel Dawn, who now served as the Imperial War Master in all but name, had anticipated such an attack, and had prepared a number of loyalist kill teams to disrupt and counteract the traitor's assault. A kill team led by Nathaniel Garro would ambush a breacher squad commanded by the Widowmaker, Vulcus Kyber, leading to a short but intense battle. As Garro engaged Kyber in combat, the Knight Errant would have Libertas knocked from his grip, leading to the blade becoming deeply embedded within the stony floor. However, when Kyber attempted to pull Libertas free in hopes of slaying Garro with his own weapon, he would prove incapable of doing so, as shown with the following passage.
Kyber's mace took Garro off his feet. Garro cartwheeled and landed hard, his pauldron splintered. Libertas had been knocked out of his grip. The sword had landed 2 meters from him, tipped down, the blade buried a third of its length deep in the stone floor. Garro struggled to recover, to get back up. Kyber thumped towards him. He glanced at the sword, quivering in the ground. He'd seen what it could do. Kyber needed everything he could get. He grabbed it to pull it free. It would not budge. He pulled harder, applying his full might to his amplified body and amplified plate. Libertas would not come free. A plated heel smashed Kyber in the face and staggered him backwards. Garro was on his feet again. His kick had creased Kyber's faceplate. Kyber ran at him. Garro slid the sword out of the stone with no effort at all. The blade came up and impaled Kyber through the chest.
Since Kyber was unable to pull Libertas free after it had become embedded in stone, despite the enhanced strength afforded to him by his Terminator warplate, this would certainly appear to support the notion that Libertas is indeed Excalibur. After all, a number of tales regarding Excalibur, though by no means all, have frequently described the sword as being embedded within a large stone or even an anvil, which was impossible for anybody, save for the one man truly worthy enough to wield it and, by extension, the one true king of Britain, to pull free from its bondage, which, according to legend, would be none other than King Arthur. Likewise, Garro, as the wielder of Libertas, was also implied to be the only man worthy enough to take up the blade, as Khyber, as mentioned earlier, was himself unable to pull the sword from the stone. This in turn would also appear to suggest that Nathaniel Garro, who, as mentioned earlier, was able to swiftly and effortlessly remove Libertas from its stony prison, despite being clad in a relatively modest suit of power armor, could himself be a descendant of the legendary King Arthur, or at the very least, an inheritor of the Arthurian legacy. While power armor does indeed augment the strength of those that wear it, such benefits pale in comparison to those afforded by Terminator armor. Although there does exist a possibility, albeit a minute one, that Khyber's failed attempts to pull Libertas free had simply made it easier for Garro to do so himself. But if Libertas is indeed Excalibur, then one would need to ask as to what happened to the sword after the apparent death of Garro. After all, according to the Garro anthology, the Hand of the Sigillite was described as being the first true martyr of the Imperial cult, and at least one shrine dedicated to him would be erected by the future ecclesiarchy. This would suggest that, somewhere within the galaxy, Libertas, or rather Excalibur, is currently waiting for a warrior worthy enough to take it up once more. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.